Welcome to another Mr. Jim's Hot Rod Barn video. This is a John Deere riding lawn mower that's been sitting up for the season, and we went to crank it up, and it was running, but it would not stay running. It'd get under a load, and it would just cut out, sputter, cut off. It wouldn't pull. So just figure it's time to give it a good carburetor cleaning. You know, the other thing you would want to do at this point is put a fresh spark plug in it. But basically, just take the carburetor off. There's a few bolts. You know, the air cleaner comes off. That's pretty much it. You know, if you're a little uneasy about the linkage and all, you might want to take a picture of how it's set up, so when you put it back together, you'll know how it goes. Most of them are pretty simple, but you know, you can get them crossed. And if you do, they usually will run wide open. They won't idle down, and you know, they'll get stuck in a wide open position. So you know, make sure you get them back on there the right way. You know, take fuel line off, carburetor slides off, and usually you can just tilt it a little bit, take the linkage off, and off it comes. So we'll take it in the shop and get it disassembled and get it ready to clean. Okay, back in the shop here, take the nut off the bottom of the carburetor. Some of them have a little mixture screw on them, but this one is just a fixed plug. So take it off. There's a washer, comes off, and then the fuel bowl itself. And once you get the bowl off, you'll want to take your float assembly out. So there is a pin that holds that float in, and I'm going to show you on another carburetor because this video isn't the best. Here we go. This is on actually a different carburetor, but it's the same setup. Just got the pin that you slide out. Just slide it. You might have to take a little nail and tap it out, but it will come out. Float comes off, and underneath your float there is a needle that controls your fuel flow into the carburetor. You want to pull it out and sit it aside, and it's the seat is made into that housing of the carburetor, so there's not much else there to take off. There's some of them have a mixture screw on the side. My suggestion is, if you don't know, just count the number of turns and run it clockwise inward. There's a half, 1, 1.5, and 2, and it's bottomed out. So once you bottom it out, just go ahead and take it out, back it out, and when you put it back together, you'll want to set that mixture screw at 2 turns initially to get it all started back up. That should set you pretty close as far as your fuel mixture for your idle. Now the one off the John Deere didn't even have a mixture screws, so you don't have to worry about those if you don't have them. That's got a small little brass washer behind it, so you want to take that off and make sure you don't lose it. And there is a little rubber plug down in there as well that fits down in that hole, and you have to get it out with a little pick. I think sometimes you can pull them out. But that's most everything that you need to take off the carb, and then it's ready to sit into the tank and get it ready to clean. So we'll get the tank. Got a gallon can of the Berryman's carburetor cleaner, and it has a strainer basket that you can put your parts in. It's good for small carburetors, lawnmowers, things like that. I had issues trying to put you know, big 4-barrel carbs and stuff off the cars in there, but you can manage to clean like the bowls on a Holly, things like that in it as well. But it's a good cleaner, and if you have to, you might get you like a Tupperware bowl or something and pour it into that. If your carburetor will fit into it, you might have to put it in that if it's bigger than the can itself, because it's just a gallon, like a gallon paint can. But I got that. I've had this can for a number of years, bought it at an auto parts store, and as long as you keep it sealed up, it's good for quite a few years. So put your carb in it, let it sit overnight, and when you get it back out the next day or so, you'll want to wash it off with water and blow it out with air. Back, make sure this needle's not worn, got a wear spot or chipped off. It should have a nice point. Usually you can put it in there, and if you take a can of carburetor cleaner and hold that down, and spray up in here. This should fill up. And then if you open that needle, obviously you're going to get some liquid out of there. Just to make sure that's clean when you put it back together. That's your valve or your door. That shuts off your fuel. So you want to make sure that it shuts off as it needs to. Your float, put the pin back in. If you've got a brass float, they are adjustable. The plastic ones are not. So the main thing is once you've got it back together, pretty much that float needs to be fairly level or slightly elevated here. If you've got it bent way up like that, where it sits normally without my finger on it, if it's sitting that way up like that, chances are it's going to fill the bowl too full of fuel and flood, so you need to lower it, which we're looking at it upside down. So the way it would look would be like this. If this is raised up too high, if this goes up too high, it will flood. If it's sitting way down too low, then your problem is you don't have enough fuel in the bowl. When you throttle the engine wide open, it's going to run out of fuel and bog and cut out that way too. So you want to make sure you got that pretty level. Usually I find that a level float all the way across is pretty much your best bet. You don't have too much trouble with that. There may be some actual specs to measure it with a ruler. You know, if you've got a service manual for the mower, that would help you as far as coming up with the specs on it, how to set it. But anyway, enough said with that. Just check it, make sure it's where it needs to be. There is that rubber seal that goes around here. Obviously on this old one I don't have the seal to it, but make sure you put that seal back on. Put your bowl on. Your nut that holds it, this one's got a mixture screw in it. The John Deere one did not. I never took it out of this, but same thing as like I showed you with the mixture screw. If you run it all the way down, you can bottom this one out by hand and then back it out the number of turns. If you don't know, usually you set these roughly around 1.5, 2 turns. They'll usually run. This is your main jet. There is a O-ring that goes around it. This one's broke because it's the old carb. So get you, make sure you got a good one. Put your needle, your bowl screw back in, tighten all that down, and put your bowl back on. If you had the mixture screw in the side, make sure you put the little rubber seal back down in the hole, and you got the spring on it, and then you got the this one had the brass washer. Just kind of remember the order they go. Draw a picture if you have to, take a photo, whatever, to remember it. And of course that one, you'd run it all the way back in, like we had it, bottom it out, and so we're getting bottomed out here. Anyway, you bottom it out, there it is, and then 1/2, 1, 1.5, 2 turns back out like it was, and that should get you pretty well set up to go back on the mower. So we'll go back to the video of installing and go from there. Okay, got the carburetor set back up here on the mower. Just make sure when you put it on, all your linkages move freely. So your choke, your throttle there, and like this up here, this particular model, you have to push it all the way up to choke it. So the choke's closed, you pull it back down and the choke opens up. And then you can see the throttle actually open and close on the back right here. Make sure all that's good and free. Everything looks good. I put a new fuel line on here. The other one split with me. I put those screw clamps on. I am not a huge fan of these little spring clip fuel clamps, or even on radiators and things like that, because once you use them, the tension kind of goes off of them, and they usually tend to leak, or they're just a pain anyway to get on and off. So I like to just change them out and use these screw clamps. I've gone and bought a whole case of them. They sell them like over at Harbor Freight, places like that. You can buy like a whole box of assorted sizes, and they're pretty cheap. Okay, folks, it fired right off, and let it run for just a second or two, and it idled down. So it seemed
Seems to be doing pretty good.